Welcome to Vulture Podcast on YouTube. And hey, if you're enjoying this deep dive, definitely hit that subscribe button for the Vulture Podcast channel. We've got lots more insightful conversations coming your way.
And welcome, the learner. It's great to have you with us for this special session, tailored just for you. You've given us, well, quite a stack of fascinating information to dig into today.
We certainly have. Today, we're diving headfirst into the Global EV Outlook 2024. This comes from the International Energy Agency, the IEA.
Right, and it's supported by the Electric Vehicles Initiative, or EVI. Think of it as probably the most comprehensive look at where electric mobility stands right now, globally, and where it might be going.
Exactly. Our mission really is to unpack the most critical takeaways from this pretty dense report. We're talking EV sales, charging infrastructure,
battery technology, absolutely, the impact on emissions, investment trends, policy. I mean, it covers a lot of ground.
It really does. We've got historical data, projections running all the way out to 2035, plus analysis of the key markets. So yeah, get ready for some maybe surprising facts and figures. Hopefully it'll give everyone a solid handle on where this EV revolution actually stands.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with the sales figures. It's kind of amazing how concentrated the market still is.
Yeah, let's jump into that. It is pretty striking. The report says that in 2023, get this, nearly 95% of all global electric car sales happened in just 3 places.
Just 3. That's China.
China, yeah, taking the lion's share, just under 60%. Then Europe, just under 25%.
And the United States at about 10%.
Exactly. And that kind of concentration, it gives those regions, especially China, a huge amount of influence, setting standards, controlling battery supply chains.
Which, down the line, affects costs and availability everywhere else, for everyone listening, potentially.
Absolutely. And what about market share within those regions? That tells the story too, right?
Yeah. It really does. In China, more than 1 out of every 3 new cars registered last year was electric. Over a third.
Wow. And Europe?
Still very strong. Over 1 in 5 new registrations were electric.
Okay, and the U.S. is catching up.
Catching up, yeah. 1 in 10 new cars registered was electric. So growing, but still behind the other 2.
But the report makes a point, doesn't it? Outside of these big 3, sales are, well, pretty limited.
Yeah, even in places you might expect more activity, like Japan or India, developed markets. But EV sales just haven't taken off in the same way yet.
And it connects to the overall car market too, right?
Yeah.
These 3 regions aren't just big in EVs, they're big in cars generally.
Precisely. China, Europe, and the US, they make up something like 2/3 of total global car sales, and the car's already on the road. So their shift to EVs, it has a massive ripple effect globally.
And it looks like the pace isn't letting up, especially in China. Q1 of 2024.
Oh yeah, really strong growth there. Almost 1.9 million electric cars sold. That's up about 35% compared to Q1 of 2023.
35%.
Yeah.
And they talk about NEVs, right? New energy vehicles. That's a broader category in China.
It is. It includes battery electrics, plug-in hybrids, and even fuel cell vehicles. And the big news there was March 2024.
What happened in March?
For the first time, NEV sales actually crossed 40% of total car sales in China. That's a huge milestone.
40%. But hang on, there was something interesting within that growth, wasn't there?
Yeah.
About hybrids versus pure electrics.
Yes, this is really fascinating. In that first quarter of 2024, plug-in hybrid sales, PHEVs, they grew much faster than battery electric vehicles, BEVs.
How much faster?
PHEV sales jumped around 75% year on year, whereas BEV sales, still growing, but more like 15%.
75% versus 15. Wow.
Yeah.
So what does that suggest? Maybe range anxiety still playing a role, or incentives?
Could be a mix of things. Consumer preference, maybe manufacturers pushing PHEVs for strategic reasons, potentially government policies favoring them in some way. It's definitely something to watch, as it could influence what models pop up elsewhere later.
So looking ahead for China this year, 2024, what's the projection?
Around 10 million electric car sales is the forecast. That would be almost 25% growth from 2023.
And if that happens, electric cars could be nearly half of all car sales in China this year.
Getting close, yeah. Around 45%. It just shows the incredible speed of the transition there.
And it's not just the giants. The report mentions emerging markets too, like Mexico, Thailand.
That's right. Cheaper models, often from Chinese brands, are really starting to gain traction there.
And Mexico's supply chain is getting a boost from the US.
Sort of indirectly, yeah. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, with its big subsidies, is spurring investment and development in Mexico's EV supply chain. It's all interconnected.
Which leads us nicely into policy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That concentration of sales really underscores how much government actions in just a few places can shape the global picture.
Absolutely. And the IEA report maps this out really well with its different scenarios. Let's talk about what those policies might mean for the future.
Okay, so policy, the main scenario, the stated policy scenario, or step yes. What does that assume?
It basically looks at the policies that are already on the books or firmly planned energy, climate, industrial policies.
And based on those policies, what's the prediction for, say, 2035?
It's pretty dramatic. By 2035, under current policies, the IEA projects that every other car sold globally will be electric, 1 and 2.
Half the market. And what about the cars actually on the road by then? Or even sooner, like 2030?
Yeah, the impact on the fleet is significant too. By 2030, in the Step S scenario, almost 1 in 3 cars driving around in China could be electric.
1 in 3 in China.
Yeah.
And the US and EU.
Close to 1 in 5 cars on the road in both the US and the EU by 2030. Still a big shift.
And the knock-on effect for oil demand. That's got to be huge if this plays out.
It's potentially massive. Across all vehicle types, this transition could cut oil demand by 6 million barrels a day in 2030 under current policy.
6 million barrels. And by 2035.
It jumps to over 10 million barrels per day globally.
10 million barrels a day. Just wow. To put that in perspective.
It's roughly equivalent to all the oil used for road transport in the entire United States today. That's the scale we're talking about.
It really highlights the potential impact. And recent policies are just reinforcing this trend, right?
They are. The report points to new emission standards that came in over the last year or so in Canada, the EU, the US.
And it's not just sticks, it's carrots too, the industrial incentives.
Exactly. Things like the IRA in the US, the EU's Net Zero Industry Act, China's big 5-year plans, India's PLI scheme for manufacturing.
PLI being production-linked incentive.
Right. All aimed at boosting domestic production, supply chains, jobs in the EV sector.
Okay, so that's the current policy's outlook. What if countries actually hit all their climate targets? The more ambitious scenario.
That's the Announced Pledges scenario, or APS. If governments meet all their stated energy and climate goals and do it on time.
Which is a big if, maybe.
It is, but if they do, then by 2035, 2/3 of all vehicles sold globally could be electric.
2/3. And the oil saving then?
Even bigger, around 12 million barrels per day avoided.
Incredible potential. But, okay, making any of this happen relies heavily on a couple of key things the report digs into: affordability and batteries.
Nail it. How much these cars cost upfront and how quickly battery prices come down, those are probably the biggest factors for mass adoption.
And battery prices have been a bit of a roller coaster, haven't they?
They have. After years of falling, 2022 actually saw the first increase in lithium-ion pack prices, about 7% up thanks to chaos in the battery metal markets.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah.
But 2023 saw a reversal.
Big time. Metal prices calmed down and lithium-ion pack prices dropped nearly 14% year on year in 2023. That's really encouraging for making EVs cheaper.
Does it matter where the batteries are made? Is China still way cheaper?
Currently, yeah, China generally supplies the cheapest batteries, but the report suggests prices are starting to converge globally. Batteries are becoming more of a commodity, maybe.
Okay, and within batteries, there's different tech. LFP is mentioned a lot. Lithium iron phosphate.
Huge deal. LFP batteries. They're significantly cheaper to make than the nickel manganese cobalt ones, the NMC chemistry that used to dominate.
It's how much cheaper? And are they taking over?
They don't need cobalt or as much nickel, which helps the cost.
Yeah.
And yeah, their market share is soaring. Over 40% of global EV sales by battery capacity in 2023 used LFP. That's more than double their share from just 2020.
Wow. So lower cost, maybe slightly less energy density sometimes, but clearly winning on price.
Pretty much. And looking ahead, innovation is key. The report flags things like sodium-ion batteries.
Sodium ion, what's the potential there?
Potentially like a 20% cost reduction compared to current lithium batteries. And the really big thing, they don't need any lithium at all. That could be massive for supply chains and cost.
Interesting. Alongside batteries, there's this other trend emerging, pushing for smaller, lighter vehicles. Governments are getting involved.
They are starting to, yes. We're seeing policies aimed at nudging people away from, well, massive cars cars. Norway's had weight-based taxes for a while.
Right, though EVs were exempt for a bit.
France now has a tax that gets progressively heavier, literally. For heavier ICE and plug-in hybrid cars over 1,600 kilograms, BEVs are exempt there, though.
And Paris had that big referendum, didn't they? Jacking up parking fees for visiting SUVs.
Exactly. Tripling them based on weight, with different thresholds for combustion engine versus electric.
Yeah.
It's all about curbing the size creep.
And other countries are looking at this too. Estonia, Finland.
Switzerland, the Netherlands. Yeah. The report suggests more tools governments could use. Caps on vehicle size or weight, maybe even battery size. Easier financing for smaller cars, ensuring enough chargers for cars that might have shorter ranges.
Which all feeds into the big question for buyers. What's the total cost of ownership, the TCO? How does it stack up?
The report gives a good example from Germany in 2022, a medium-sized BV, maybe 10–20% more expensive to buy up front than a similar petrol car.
Okay, so pricier in Italy.
After 5 years, when you factor in savings on fuel and maintenance, that same BEV was actually 10–20% cheaper overall.
Cheaper over 5 years, that's significant. What about annual savings?
For an electric SUV in Germany, they estimated average annual savings around USD 1,800 over 10 years.
Okay, what about the US? Fuel's cheaper there, but people drive more.
Right, so higher mileage offsets the cheaper fuel somewhat. Savings were estimated around USD 1,600 per year in the US.
And China. Lower electricity prices?
Yeah, very cheap electricity, but people tend to drive less annually. Still, savings were estimated around USD 1,000 per year, so the running costs definitely help the TCO argument.
Understanding the cost is one thing, but what can people actually buy right now? Let's zoom in on the US market for a moment. What's available? What does it cost?
Okay, U.S. market snapshot as of early 2024, factoring in tax credits where possible.
So GM stopped making the Bolt EV late last year, right? That was a popular, affordable one.
They did, though a new version is promised for 2025. So for a bit, the cheapest BEV available in early 2024 was the Nissan Leaf, the one with the smaller 40 kilowatt of battery,
Price point.
just under USD 30,000. Though at the time of the report, it wasn't eligible for the IRA tax credits.
And Ford made some noise about strategy, shifting focus a bit.
Yeah, they indicated they might actually ramp up some ICE production temporarily, using the profits from those to fund the very expensive transition to EVs, rather than just focusing on big, pricey electric trucks and SUVs right away.
Interesting pivot. And Tesla, still talking about that affordable model.
They are. They announced plans for a next-gen, compact, more affordable EV, aiming for production by June 2025. People have been waiting a while. They first mentioned a USD 25,000 model way back in 2020.
Still waiting for that one then. The report also mentions micro EVs, tiny city cars.
Yeah, those little things priced maybe between $5,000 and $20,000. Not common in the US yet, but the potential is there.
Why potential?
Well, data suggests something like 80% of car trips in the US are actually under 10 miles. So theoretically, these micro EVs could handle a lot of daily driving needs.
That's the surprising stat, and the IEA put this all in context with income, right? Comparing cheapest EV versus cheapest petrol car prices against household income.
They did for China, Europe, using Germany, and the US. It really starkly shows the affordability challenge, how much of a household's income is needed for even the cheapest options in different places. It's a key barrier.
Okay, so new cars are one thing, but the used market is becoming really important too, isn't it, for making EVs more accessible,
Absolutely critical. And the good news there is that used EV prices are coming down.
making them more competitive.
Definitely. More competitive against used petrol cars and even against some new cars. In the US, the average used EV price is heading towards that USD 25,000 mark.
And why is 25K important?
Because that's the price cap to be eligible for the used EV federal tax credit, which is worth USD 4,000. That's a big help.
So falling prices plus a tax credit could really open up the market. We saw big drops in Tesla prices specifically.
Yeah, secondhand Tesla prices fell quite sharply between early 2023 and early 2024 in the US, made them a much more viable option for more people.
What about Europe? What are used EVs going for there?
Secondhand BEVs, you're looking typically in the range of, say, EUR 15,000 to EUR 25,000. Plug-in hybrids maybe a bit more, around EUR 30,000.
And some countries are even subsidizing used EV purchases.
That's right. Places like the Netherlands and France have specific incentives for buying secondhand electric cars.
And China. Used EV prices there.
Pretty competitive already. The average in 2023 was around CNY 75,000, which is only about USD 11,000. A strong used market is definitely helping accelerate adoption.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Passenger cars get most of the attention, but electrification is happening elsewhere too.
Like,
Light commercial vehicles, two-wheelers.
it is, though the global electric two-wheeler market actually dipped in 2023.
Oh, why was that?
Mostly down to falling sales in China. Seems like they had some supply chain hiccups getting parts, materials, that sort of thing. But growth in the rest of Asia for two-wheelers is holding steady.
And light commercial vehicles, LCVs, vans, basically.
That market looks like it's maturing. We're seeing more new electric models announced, some designed for specific jobs like delivery vans, the Beyond Pelkin was mentioned.
And partnerships too, Kia and Uber.
Yeah, developing a sort of modular van, adaptable for ride-sharing or last-mile delivery. Interesting concepts emerging.
Has the range improved for electric vans? That was a concern early on.
Big improvement. Average range for new electric LCVs jumped by 55% between 2015 and 2023. Think newer models like the 4D Transit versus older ones like the original Nissan ENV 200.
But accuracy of range labeling is still an issue.
Businesses want more reliable, real-world range estimates. Yeah, that's still a point of feedback.
And Korea is a bit of an outlier here. More electric vans than cars, proportionally.
It's the only country where electric LCV adoption is actually ahead of passenger cars. Seems models like the Hyundai Porter and Kia Bongo really hit a sweet spot for their local freight market, helped by good pricing and subsidies.
Okay, so light duty covered. What about the big stuff? Heavy duty electric vehicles, HDVs, trucks and buses.
Also starting to gain traction, though it's a tougher challenge. Lots of demonstration projects are happening.
Like those mentioned in the US and UK. Run on less, zero emission HGV.
Exactly. Trying to figure out which trucking routes and jobs are best suited for electrification right now, gathering that crucial real-world data.
And policies moving here too. India has an initiative.
Yeah, the Electric Freight Accelerator for Sustainable Transport. Trying to get government and private companies working together on large-scale electric freight.
In terms of available models, who's leading the pack for heavy duty?
China, by a long shot. Chinese manufacturers offer the widest selection, like 430 different battery electric HDV models listed.
430, what types are they focusing on?
A lot of focus on urban buses. Nearly 40% of their electric HDV models are buses. But they're expanding across other truck segments, too.
How does North America compare?
Fewer models overall, just over 170 battery electric HDVs. And the emphasis is more on medium-duty trucks. That's over 60% of their electric HDV offerings.
Medium duty? Is that where the economics work better right now?
It seems so. The report suggests electric medium-duty trucks can already compete on total cost of ownership with diesel in some cases, especially if you can charge them cheaply at a depot and get incentives. We're also seeing new companies popping up targeting just that segment.
And Chinese manufacturers tend to offer models across more segments than Western ones.
On average, yes. An individual Chinese OEM often has a broader portfolio of electric trucks and buses compared to their North American or European counterparts. Gives them flexibility.
Okay, so more and more EVs of all sizes hitting the road, which means we desperately need places to charge them. Infrastructure time.
The critical enabler, absolutely. And there's progress. Global public charging points increased by over 40% in 2023.
40% growth. Any particular type growing faster.
Yes, fast chargers grew quicker than slow chargers. 55% growth for fast chargers. By the end of 2023, they made up over 35% of all public chargers globally.
But how this deployment looks varies a lot country by country, right? The ratio of EVs to chargers.
Hugely variable. It reflects different strategies and how mature the market is.
Like New Zealand. They have the most EVs per charger.
They do, which sounds bad, but they've heavily prioritized fast chargers. They have the highest proportion of fast chargers globally, like 75% of their public network.
So fewer chargers overall, but more of them are high speed. Who else focuses on fast chargers?
South Africa, China, Norway also have high proportions of fast chargers.
And on the flip side, more slow chargers.
Countries like Brazil, the Netherlands, and Korea have generally deployed more slow public chargers relative to fast ones. Different approaches.
And for the heavy-duty trucks, specific strategies are needed, like the U.S. Freight Corridor Plan.
Exactly. The U.S. National Zero-Emission Freight Corridor Strategy aims to build out charging hubs along key freight routes in phases. Smaller projects like Run on Less also install chargers at depots.
But charging lots of big trucks puts a strain on the grid, doesn't it?
Potentially, yes. High-powered charging can cause issues. Countries like the Netherlands are already thinking about policies to manage this.
How? What are the solutions?
One idea getting traction is co-locating big battery storage systems right next to the high-powered chargers. They can buffer the grid, smooth out demand, maybe even earn money providing grid services.
Clever. And overall, governments are stepping up support for public charging.
Generally, yes. There's growing recognition that robust public charging is essential, so policy support and funding are strengthening. Though, as mentioned, the actual ratios EVs per charger or kilowatt per EV still vary wildly between countries.
Okay, let's get back to the heart of the EV, the battery, demand, production materials. What's the picture there?
Demand is soaring. Global battery demand for EVs hit 700 gigaliter-H in 2023. That's up over 30%.
Where's the fastest growth?
Actually, the US and Europe saw the fastest growth rates in battery demand, both over 40% year-on-year. China followed at around 35%.
And those plug-in hybrids we talked about in China, they use batteries too, obviously.
They do. PHEVs accounted for about a third of electric car sales in China, but about 18% of the battery demand in GWH terms. Also seeing more extended range EVs there, which have larger batteries than typical PHEVs.
Where are these batteries actually being made?
Well, China dominates production overall, especially the upstream processing of materials like cathodes and anodes.
Right. But Europe and the US are building capacity.
They are. Europe produced about 110 gigawatt of batteries in 2023. The US about 70 gigawatt. Countries like Poland and Hungary are big manufacturing hubs in Europe, while Germany makes the most EVs.
And the different chemistries, LFP versus NMC, they have different supply chains.
They do, relying on different minerals and processing steps. It adds complexity.
And who's building these new battery factories in the West? Is it mostly local companies?
Interestingly, no. A lot of the big new battery manufacturing announcements in Europe and the US are actually from established Asian companies from China, Korea, Japan. So lots of international cooperation and investment is needed.
Got it. And we touched on prices falling in 2023. That trend is holding. LFP still cheaper.
Yes, prices fell in 2023 as mineral costs stabilized. LFP remains consistently cheaper than NMC, and LFP prices are dropping fast.
So LFP adoption is growing everywhere.
Growing significantly, especially in China, where it's hugely popular. In Europe and the US, the higher nickel NMC chemistries are still more common, but LFP is making inroads there too.
Okay, so that's the tech. What about the business side? The companies, the competition? It feels like a very dynamic space.
Extremely dynamic. You see EV companies doing well financially sometimes, but there's a lot of volatility, and the competition is just fierce.
Car makers are trying to lock down their own supplies.
Yeah.
Deals with battery companies, mining companies.
Absolutely. Securing those upstream materials is crucial, so car makers are doing direct deals. Investors are also increasingly interested in those raw material and battery component parts of the chain.
And all this competition is squeezing profits.
It definitely seems to be putting pressure on margins. You have the two giants, BYD and Tesla, leading global sales.
But BYD has really been challenging Tesla lately, haven't they?
Massively. In the second half of 2023, BYD actually sold more pure battery electric cars globally than Tesla did.
Overtook them on BEVs.
Wow. And if you count BYD's plug-in hybrids too, their overall electric market share is even bigger. Plus, in China, BYD is now the #1 selling car brand overall, ahead of Volkswagen.
That intense competition in China must be driving prices down.
It has. Since late 2022, there's been what some call a price war. Tesla, BYD, XPeng, GM's venture. Lots of significant price cuts, especially in early 2024. Good for consumers, maybe, but tough on profits.
What about outside China? Is competition heating up in the US too?
It is. Tesla still has a big share of US EV sales, but it's shrinking. Companies like Hyundai Kia have become the solid #2 seller. European brands are also gaining some ground in the US EV market.
And the report expects even more competition ahead, from China going global.
That's the expectation. Chinese car makers have built up huge capacity, maybe even oversupply domestically, so they're looking to export more. China actually became the world's biggest car exporter in 2023.
Can they compete internationally with import taxes and regulations?
Often, yes. Their cost base can be very low, so even with tariffs, they can be highly competitive on price and features. It's definitely shaking things up.
And venture capital is still flowing in. Where's the money going?
Still strong interest. VC money is going into battery materials, but also downstream things like charging networks. Lots of funding rounds for fast-charging companies. And definitely interest in new battery tech, solid state, sodium ion, different chemistries, plus mining tech.
Okay, so weaving all these threads together, sales, policy, tech, competition. What's the overall outlook for electric mobility, according to the IEA? Where are we heading?
Well, under current policies, that step-set scenario, EV sales keep climbing steeply. Almost 45 million EVs sold annually by 2030, that's excluding two three-wheelers, and close to 65 million by 2035.
And the sales share. What percentage of the market?
Growing from around 15% globally in 2023 to nearly 40% by 2030 and over half more than 50% by 2035. Again, that's just based on policies already in place.
And the more ambitious scenario, the announced pledges one.
Yeah.
Higher still.
Much higher sales shares in that one, yes. And the really ambitious net zero by 2050 scenario basically requires 100% zero-emission light vehicle sales by 2035.
It's interesting that for the big markets, China, Europe, US, the gap between current policies and announced pledges for 2030 sales isn't actually that huge.
Right. Their current trajectories are already quite ambitious. The gap is much bigger for other countries, suggesting they need to ramp up policies and maybe learn from the leaders if they want to catch up.
So overall, electric light-duty vehicles, cars, and vans are set for around 40% global sales share by 2030, maybe 55% by 2035 under current plans.
That's the projection, and some places like Canada and the UK have specific targets aiming for very high ZEV sales shares even sooner, by 2030.
And we're seeing movement in other segments too, like US school buses getting electrified.
Yeah, the EPA's Clean School Bus program is providing funding for that, which should really boost the electric share of new school bus sales.
And trucks. US regulations pushing electrification there.
Definitely. California's Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, the national EPA greenhouse gas standards for heavy-duty vehicles. Those are big drivers. The projection is the U.S. electric truck sales share could hit around 50% by 2035 under current policies.
And Europe's supporting this too, with things like the Net Zero Industry Act.
Yes, that act, plus more flexible state aid rules, are helping fund big projects, like the Northvolt battery gigafactories in Germany and Sweden, supporting the whole ecosystem.
Okay, what about the charging infrastructure needed to support all these millions of new EVs? What's the outlook there?
Well, even with rapid charger deployment, the number of EVs per public charger is expected to keep increasing by 2035 in most scenarios. Demand might outpace supply growth initially.
China's aiming for a huge number of chargers, though.
Massive numbers, yeah. Big targets for both fast and slow public chargers by 2035.
And Europe has rules mandating charges along highways.
Yes, the AFIR regulation requires fast chargers at regular intervals along major transport routes.
UK, Japan, India also have national targets for charger numbers.
They do. The UK aiming for 300,000 public chargers by 2030, Japan 150,000, India using Famine 2 and other schemes to support infrastructure rollout.
And for businesses, depot charging is key.
Very important for commercial fleets. Charging overnight, often at lower electricity rates, makes a lot of sense.
Plus, smart charging becomes crucial, managing grid impact.
Absolutely essential as EV numbers grow. Coordinating charging times, maybe even vehicle-to-grid technologies to balance supply and demand. And for heavy trucks, we still need better data on exactly how and where they drive to place chargers optimally.
Right. Finally, let's look at the outlook for batteries again, but also energy demand overall, and the big one, emissions.
Okay, battery manufacturing capacity is set to explode if all the announcements happen. Could exceed 9 terawatt-hours globally by 2030.
9 TWh, is that enough?
It could meet the projected demand under the announced pledges scenario and even cover most of the need for the net zero scenario by 2030.
But China might be building too much capacity.
Their committed capacity by 2030 looks far bigger than their projected domestic demand. So huge export potential, but also maybe financial risks if the global market doesn't absorb it all.
And the US and EU capacity. On track.
The committed capacity in the US and EU looks roughly sufficient for their own projected demand under the APS by 2030, but they need to scale up fast and stay cost competitive.
What about recycling? Handling old batteries?
Recycling capacity is growing, but the wave of end-of-life batteries is really just starting. It's going to become a much bigger issue and opportunity soon.
And all these EVs will need electricity, a lot of it.
Significant increase in electricity demand across all transport modes globally needs careful planning for generation and grid upgrades.
Which leads to another challenge, tax revenue. Less petrol and diesel sold means less fuel tax income for governments, right?
That's a major fiscal challenge. Fossil fuel taxes are a big revenue source, often funding roads. As EVs take over, governments will need tax reforms to replace that income.
Are the losses significant already?
The net tax revenue losses are projected to grow substantially by 2035 globally. Europe currently sees the biggest impact because their fuel taxes are generally higher.
Okay, the payoff for all this transition has to be emissions reductions, right? How big's the benefit?
It's substantial. Road transport electrification is key to hitting climate goals. The net avoided emissions under the stated policy scenario are projected at 1.8 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in 2035.
1.8 joules. And even more if grids get cleaner faster.
Exactly. The announced pledges scenario sees higher avoided emissions because it assumes faster power sector decarbonization alongside the EV growth.
And even today, life cycle emissions of EVs are lower, from manufacturing to driving to disposal.
Generally, yes, especially battery electric cars compared to internal combustion engine cars. The life cycle advantage is already there, and it just gets bigger as the electricity used to charge them gets cleaner.
What about plug-in hybrids, though? You mentioned their real-world emissions can be higher.
That's a known issue. Real-world CO2 from PHEVs is often much higher than the official lab test values, simply because people might not charge them as often as assumed, relying more on the petrol engine.
So policymakers are starting to look beyond just tailpipe emissions, considering the whole life cycle.
There's growing recognition, yes. Things like the EU's upcoming battery passport, France adjusting subsidies based on manufacturing emissions, Brazil looking at recycling. It's moving towards a fuller picture.
And the battery itself, its life cycle footprint varies.
It does, depending on the chemistry. LFP often has a lower footprint than high-nickel NMC. Where the materials come from, how much energy is used in manufacturing, and crucially, how much recycled material is used. Lots of potential to reduce the battery's impact further.
Wow. Okay, that was a lot to cover. So pulling it all together, what does this really mean for you, the learner?
Hopefully this deep dive has given you a much clearer, maybe more nuanced picture of this incredibly dynamic world of electric vehicles. We've gone from sales numbers to policies, batteries to charging.
Yeah, it's clear the shift to electric transport is really gathering pace globally. I mean, the momentum seems undeniable, but obviously still plenty of challenges and, frankly, exciting developments still to come.
Absolutely. It's this constant interplay, isn't it? Government pushing with policy, industry pulling with technology and innovation, and market competition keeping everyone on their toes. That's what's shaping the journey.
We've definitely thrown a lot of information out there today, and if you're anything like me, you might actually have more questions now than when we started.
Which is usually a good sign. It means it's a genuinely fascinating and complex area. If specific things caught your interest, we really encourage you to dig deeper. That IEA Global EV Outlook 2024 report is packed with data if you want the source material.
Definitely check it out. And thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As always, don't forget to subscribe to Vulture Podcast for more explorations like this.
We really appreciate you tuning in, appreciate your curiosity. It's always great to unpack these important topics.